So in the past week or so, I, on this channel, have created 3 videos talking about the possible connection that is, in my opinion, becoming much more likely and substantiated between Richard Allen and Kegan Kline. As I've read through subscriber and viewer comments on the videos, people have contributed some really interesting insight and ideas, and others have questioned, what is the connection really? There's obviously no connection here. I don't see how this connection is being made. So I just want to lay it out and make it really clear. And you can, of course, determine for yourself if you think that there is a connection. I personally believe the connection is nearly undeniable. So I want to start by looking at both the beginning, when the murders occurred, and the end, when Richard Allen was finally arrested over 5 years later. Starting with the timeline of how the investigation progressed in the beginning, one of the reasons this timeline of the investigation is so important is because it allows us to know what investigators knew and when, at least some of what investigators knew and when, because there has always been a lot of information in the Delphi murder case that has not been released to the public. So it was, of course, on February 14th, 2017, that the bodies of Liberty German and Abby Williams were found, and it was announced to the public late in that day. On February 15th, investigators found Liberty German's phone and found that she had taken a recording of somebody walking down the bridge. This person later became known as Bridge Guy. And police released a grainy still photo of Bridge Guy immediately on February 15th. On February 22nd, police released a portion of the audio from the recording on Liberty German's phone. That is the infamous Down the Hill recording. It would not be known by the public until years later that that recording was actually 43 seconds long. Investigators, of course, knew this all along, so investigators had this 43-second recording from go. On July 17th, 2017, about 5 months after the murders, police released the first composite sketch of Bridge Guy. It should be noted that all along in these first 5 months after the murder and in years to come, the family and friends and community of Abby Williams and Libby German were extremely active in getting word out and doing anything and everything that they could to find the murderer and find justice for the 2 girls. From the day the girls went missing until even now, droves of people were calling in tips and providing information about who they believed was involved in committing these heinous murders. Although some of the information was irrelevant or even false, investigators were given plenty of information by both the citizens of Delphi, the surrounding community, and literally across the country. According to Indiana State Police Superintendent Doug Carter, the investigation was an active investigation all along. Now, it wasn't until April 22nd, 2019, when investigators released the second composite sketch of the suspect who committed these murders. This definitely threw people for a loop, as the second sketch looked much younger than the first and they didn't look too much alike, but we will get back to that a little bit later. There were details that were known to investigators that the public found out later, including the fact that an FBI agent had noted in regards to the crime scene that pieces of clothing from one of the victims was missing and that it, quote, appeared the girls' bodies were moved and staged, end quote. They also noted there was no visible signs of a struggle or a fight. Also released later on is that they did recover fibers and unknown hairs from the crime scene. When you consider all that was learned in the very beginning of the investigation that I mentioned along the timeline and the additional information investigators knew that was later revealed to the public, they had access to a lot of information about this killer. since literally the day of the murders or the day after the murders. Let's talk about Kegan Kline. Kegan Kline's home in Peru, Indiana was searched on February 23, 2017, just 10 days after Abby and Libby were murdered. Cops searched his house on unrelated CP charges at that time. It wasn't until August of 2020 was Kegan Kline arrested on CP and child exploitation charges that resulted in 30 felony charges and a trial scheduled down the road. Investigators interviewed Kegan Kline after his arrest and questioned him about the charges and who may have had access to his electronic devices. While they focused on questioning him about his dad, he vehemently denied that his father had any access to his electronic devices, saying that he wouldn't let him have his electronic devices for very long. While Kegan Kline admitted to talking to Libby German under the Anthony Schatz social media profile, he said that he did not talk to her the day before or the day of the murders. The Anthony profile social media persona was scheduled to meet Libby on the day of the murders, and Kegan Kline also vehemently denied that it was him behind the Anthony Schatz profile talking to Libby. Police gave Kegan Kline a polygraph examination, to which the polygraph test rendered truthful when Kegan Kline said that he had not talked to Libby using the Anthony Schatz social media profile for 2 weeks before the murders. Again, the polygraph results said that he was truthful in that statement of not talking to her 2 weeks before the murders. On the same polygraph exam, when Kegan Kline was asked if he knew who committed the murders, to which he answered no, the polygraph results deceptive. Now let's fast forward to August of 2022. In August of 2022, it was learned that investigators were searching the Wabash River just 2 miles from where Kegan Kline lived. This search went on for 5 weeks, and this search of the Wabash River was the event that intensified the search in the Delphi murder case that eventually led up to the arrest of Richard Allen on October 26, 2022. Now, what was the catalyst that caused investigators to search the river in the first place? Well, we didn't know what that was until just yesterday, November 15th, 2022. When a police source had confirmed to News Channel 8 that the recent 5-week state police search of the Wabash River in Peru was connected to the Delphi investigation. Connection. Now remember, it's the search of the Wabash River in August of 2022 that intensified the investigation that eventually led up to the arrest of Richard Allen a little over 2 months later. The police source goes on to say that the search was initiated after Kegan Kline told police they would find a cell phone and a weapon in the river. That evidence was, in fact, never found, and Kline is known for lying to investigators, so we do need to know more about this bit of information before making a conclusive judgment on this information. Now, regardless of whether Kegan Kline was lying or not about knowing that there was a cell phone and a weapon in the Wabash River, this is what I believe is important. Again, it's this 5-week search of the Wabash River that intensified the investigation that just 2.5 months later, after well over 5 years, an arrest was made with charges of 2 counts of murder for the murder of Abby Williams and Liberty German. In my opinion, it's like this. Although Kegan Kline may not have given investigators correct information that led them to finding Richard Allen finally, which led to his arrest, I believe
telling them that they needed to search the Wabash River because there was a cell phone and weapon in there was either, maybe the beginning or the middle of Kegan Kline throwing things out to investigators, perhaps an effort to play games with them that ultimately led to Kegan Kline giving them good information that led to the arrest of Richard Allen. The timing is just too coincidental for me. Is this all enough to convince you that there was a connection between Kegan Kline and Richard Allen? Well, wait, there's more.
Now remember, there were 30 child sexual abuse and child exploitation felony charges against Kegan Kline. And the timing is like this. Prosecutors filed a motion just days after Richard Allen was arrested for some of those charges to be dropped. And another request has been filed to downgrade the remaining charges. The charges of child sexual abuse and child exploitation, felony charges, all of them. So here's a quote from the prosecutor's office. There is insufficient evidence to prove said counts beyond reasonable doubt at trial. What? If you're thinking this timing is extremely suspicious, you're definitely not alone.
So what if the polygraph exam results were correct in saying that Kegan Kline was being truthful when he said he hadn't talked to Libby through the Anthony Shots profile in 2 weeks before the murders? Well, we know that someone was talking to Libby through the Anthony Shots profile and was in fact one of the last persons to talk to Libby before the death of Abby and Libby. So who was that then? It had to be somebody. Phone records don't lie. Could it have been Richard Allen? Because Richard Allen was arrested for murdering Abby and Libby, and these murders happened on the very same day the person using the Anthony Shot social media profile was supposed to meet Libby while she was on her hike with Abby on the Monon High Bridge Trail. Coincidence enough for you? This is way too many coincidences for me. I'll say it again. If Richard Allen's arrest wasn't enough to convince someone that he was there on the Monon High Bridge Trail and committed the murders, well, we also have this, another dot to connect.
It is that Richard Allen, who was arrested in the murders of Abby Williams and Liberty German, had told a state conservation officer he was in the area on the day of the killings, but his report may have been considered unfounded, and this is a police source telling News Channel 8. So Richard Allen, we know he's age 50, apparently went to the conservation officer right after Abby and Libby's murders on February 17th, 2017. And he told the conservation officer that he was on the Monon High Bridge that afternoon, but he didn't see the two girls. Again, this is what the police source tells News Team 8. So apparently, Allen's statement was forgotten until recently when Indiana police became frustrated when the status of the Delphi investigation, and they asked a group of investigators to look over some files that were related to the case. So this article also says that investigators believe Allen is the man on the bridge in the cell phone video and in the sketches released by police. And again, this is a police source telling News Team 8.
If you can't believe what you heard, you probably did hear it right. Richard Allen himself put himself on the Monon High Bridge Trail on the day of the murders, the afternoon of the murders, when it was the afternoon when Libby and Abby went on their hike. And he told a conservation officer of this on February 17th, 2017, just a couple days after the murders. And I mean, Come on, guys. Okay, so let's start to wrap this up. Wrap up why connecting all of these dots leads one to an understanding that Richard Allen and Kegan Kline were in fact connected. Let's again talk about the size of Delphi, Indiana. Delphi, Indiana is 2.51 square miles, very small in size. And the population, as of the 2020 census, is 2,975 people. That's less than 3,000 people. I mean, put that into perspective. Think of a sports stadium that holds tens of thousands of people, or perhaps your high school had a student body of this size. Most colleges and universities certainly have a student body much larger than the population of Delphi. Less than 3,000 people. Richard Allen was one of those residents of Delphi, Indiana, one of those 2,975 people, and he lived very close to Liberty, and he worked right in town in the only pharmacy that there is in Delphi, Indiana, as a pharmacy technician who interacted regularly with the public. He was highly visible. Many residents of Delphi knew Richard Allen. You can find their interviews on various news channels by just doing a quick search right now and hear them speak. So it's not as though this guy was hiding under a rock or hiding in a boarded up house. He was very much out there. His face was out there. He was out in the public, working with the public, talking to the public with his voice that said down the hill. In that same voice, it doesn't seem to me like he disguised it that much when you do a voice comparison of Richard Allen's voice samples to the down the hill audio sample. They sound very much alike, and they look very much alike when you look at the audiograph. Now, I'm not trying to knock on Doug Carter. I'm not trying to knock on investigators necessarily. But man, in a town of under 3,000 people, in well over 5 years, investigators from various organizations were not able to make an arrest for the murders of a 13 and 14-year-old girl in over 5 years, well over 5 years. I just think, guys, that's freaking incredible, especially considering the murder suspect went to an officer 3 days after the murders and said, I was in that exact spot. The girls were last known to be the exact time the girls were known to be there, but I didn't see them. And the investigators lost the files. So regardless of what the investigators may or may not have done wrong, we must remember the overall timing when we look at this case. Over 5.5 years, nothing, not a single arrest directly related to the murders of a 13 and 14-year-old girl. Kegan Kline has been in jail for a couple of years. He is released from prison in August 2022, which starts the investigation of the Wabash River, which starts the intensification of the investigation back up, which leads to the arrest of Richard Allen just 2.5 months later. Days later, prosecutors drop 5 of the 30 felony charges and make a statement saying that they're looking to reduce the rest of them. And days later after that, it's finally released to the public that it was in fact Kegan Kline that initiated that search of the Wabash River by telling investigators that there was a cell phone and a weapon in the river. Okay, so let's connect the dots here, putting everything together that has been mentioned in this video and some other facts you might know about the Delphi case that I didn't even mention here. What is the most reasonable conclusion you can make? Is there a connection between Kegan Kline and Richard Allen? Or can you seriously say, there's no connection? Whatever the answer to the question, is there a connection? Maybe what we ultimately want is justice for Abby and Libby.